This episode of The Imperfects contains a discussion on eating disorders. The stories shared in this episode are unique to the people who have experienced them, and we want to acknowledge that eating disorders can present in lots of different ways in different people. If this topic brings up some concerns for you, we strongly recommend reaching out to the Butterfly Foundation or Eating Disorders Families Australia.
My name's Ryan Shelton. I'm a co-host on The Imperfects, the Jewish grandson of Austrian and English immigrants, and I grew up on and am now currently living on Wurundjeri country. I'd like to recognise the traditional peoples of this continent whose land was stolen nearly 250 years ago. In particular, we at The Imperfects would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast was recorded, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The rich storytelling history of the world's oldest living culture is what we proudly pay homage to when we share stories on The Imperfects.
We're all imperfect, and on this podcast, I'll be chatting with a variety of interesting people who are willing to make themselves vulnerable by sharing their own struggles and imperfections.
Then we'll discuss the invaluable takeaways we can all apply to our own imperfect lives.
I'm Hugh Van Kylenberg from the Resilience Project.
And I'm Ryan Shelton from my mum.
And I'm Josh from Hugh's mum.
And this is The Imperfects. Well, here we are. Again, and look, I got to say, I'm nervous. Hello, Hugh.
Hello, Ryan.
Josh.
Hello.
It's a scary episode in the sense that I'm in front of the control panel because Josh is not here, not in the room for this episode. You're away.
He's in a car in Perth on a family holiday.
Yeah, I've set up in the car because there are two children in the house, and I've set it up before the sun came out properly with pillows and blankets and stuff to soften it. Now the sun's coming out and I have a feeling I'm going to overheat in here. It's going to be very hot and sweaty. So,
okay.
Sorry.
Well, we feel great. We feel we've got temperatures.
You're comfortable?
We're in your studio. The air conditioning's working beautifully.
It's working very, very nicely.
Beautiful.
So big, exciting episode. Well, it's a two-parter.
It was so good. We turned it, quite legitimately, it was so good.
Yeah.
We didn't want to cut anything out and we turned it to two-parter. It is unbelievable.
Well, I mean, lots of the episodes, all of them are good. This one we didn't realise how long we'd been recording the interview with. So Kate Reid, founder of Lune Croissants.
Which was voted the best croissant in the world.
Well, I mean, voted by the journalist who wrote the article. Oh. Yeah, it wasn't.
I thought it was a committee. I thought it was like a one man thinks that this is the best croissant in the world.
A committee. Croissant committee.
Committee.
A committee. No, it was one. The New York Times, journalist from the New York Times, named it the best croissant in the world.
Very influential journalist, wasn't it?
Yeah. He's a food writer, yeah.
Both of you love pastries.
Mm. You don't?
Mm.
I'm trying not to.
Hang on, how do you try not to like something?
Oh no, I like it. I don't consume it as much as enough. I don't have them enough to be able to be a
connoisseur.
That's extremely good. Yeah,
I don't know about that, but I'll take it.
This will be a three-part episode now. Let's keep going.
I think I'm currently on about an average of about a pastry a day, which is really not great for my health. But I think I'm close to addicted to pastries.
Okay.
Close to addicted is. Is everything okay? I mean,
it's one of the most enjoyable parts of my day, and I don't think it's
that's not bad.
Affecting anything else except my waist.
Well, does it make you happier?
Kate Reid explained to us, which you'd be happy to know, that one croissant is about the same, really, the way they do it at Lune. It's about the same as a slice of sourdough. So
with a lot of butter on top.
Oh, is that what she said?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that bit.
Yeah, but but still, it's probably not as bad as people think. Anyway.
When I catch the tram into work, I have to walk past Lune to. Well, I don't have to, but it's the second. It's the second most convenient walk from the tram to the office. So I'll get something on the way every time. So it's part of my daily regime.
Wow.
I did feel sad for you that you weren't sitting in a room with Kate interviewing her, because I felt like that's how I'd feel if you guys interviewed and it was with Steve Waugh and I was interstate. I'd be shattered to miss it.
Steve Waugh, does Steve Waugh make croissants?
He makes cut shots. That's what he makes.
Quat shots. is the French pronunciation. God, I mean, it's just be honest and let me know when that gets old. Like, do let me know because I will keep going.
We're good for now.
So Kate Reid, big chat, and she's incredible.
Yeah, she truly is. So sorry you missed it, Josh. But yeah, she's a beauty.
Yeah, I missed it, but I was able to. This is actually the first episode I wasn't in the room for an interview ever, and it was so enjoyable. I absolutely loved it.
Not being in the room, I say not working was great.
No, I was able to listen to it objectively, and it was just one of my favourite chats we've had on the show.
Brilliant.
It was funny when I heard that we were having like Lune, best croissant in the world, great, she'll be good, but then Bridge sort of got me up to date with our producer. Bridge got me up to date with like her background, like a Formula One.
Yeah, I know. There's so much.
Someone whose job was to make the Williams Formula One cars better, who then goes, I'm going to apply this level of expertise to a pastry. I was like, oh no, now I'm in. This is so interesting.
It is. It's an epic story. And actually, the fact that you weren't here, Josh, and because I was sitting in your place where you would usually be in the interview with Hugh, I was slightly nervous to live up to the Josh Van Cuylenberg expectations of like the audience, like, oh God, I was actually very conscious. Like, in all seriousness, I was actually conscious of not. I didn't really know what my role was in the interview.
Well, I think she gave you a couple of comments of great questions to you in particular.
And Josh, how'd that make you feel?
A little nervous.
I'm coming for the good questions, Josh.
Yeah.
So I actually noticed myself at a couple of points. I think I told you this, Josh, but I haven't told you this, Ryan. I noticed myself trying to think, what would Josh say right now? And I was thinking, and I actually copied the way Josh asked questions.
Did you?
Yeah, I said.
How do you do that?
At one point when she was at a very vulnerable point, and she kind of stopped it. It was like, there's just so people know, some very, very vulnerable moments in this chat.
Yeah.
She stopped and pulled back a bit from the vulnerability, and I was like, oh, what would Josh do here? And so I copied Josh's questioning us things. I started by saying, oh, I'm really fascinated in what you just said. I'm actually really moved by what you just. He said, I'm actually really moved by what you just said. And I was like, what am I doing? I'm trying to be Josh. Just be yourself.
Classic JVC. Yeah, but the rest of your interview was authentic, though, wasn't it?
I hope so. I think the best thing for our listeners to know for this episode is it is over 2 weeks, and if you think, not sure this first bit was for me. The reason we have, in all seriousness, put into 2 episodes is they're 2 distinctly different chats with very different topics. And so we felt like it really worked to make it 2 episodes because you'll get something very different out of the first one than you will the second one. Very different themes. And I just think they're both such important things. When we listened to it, we thought we just can't take stuff out here. So it's over 2 weeks. Next week will be Kate Reid again. It'll be a very different side of the story, though.
But the overarching theme or topic, I guess, is probably perfectionism and her relationship with perfectionism, would you say, or is that wrong to say?
Well, that perfectionism, but then also the impact that a high-pressure industry, an unhealthy workplace can have on your mental health as well. I think her experience in Formula One just was devastating for her mental health, and I think so many people can relate to a point in their life where their work has caused them to spiral from a mental health point of view, but also how she worked her way through that. And she had a very significant mental illness, which really resonated, I know, with Josh and myself, with our experience of our sister. But hearing how she worked through that and what she did to get herself better, I think was something I've never heard before. So I found that fascinating as well. And just before we kick off this episode, Josh, on behalf of Ryan and myself and Bridget, our producer, we apologise to you for not giving you the credit for how difficult what you do is sitting in front of a panel. And for our listeners...
Oh, well, because Josh wasn't in the room, Josh, because you weren't here, I was sort of left to be the one to press the buttons on the magnificent Rodecaster Pro, which you would usually do, Josh, effortlessly every week, playing the intro music and the levels and everything.
I must admit, I have, as I've talked about on the show a fair bit, I've been prone to imposter syndrome. And I think in this case, I thought, no, actually, I am worthy. I do have a place on this show. I've got something to do.
Yeah.
I don't feel like an imposter when touching the buttons.
You're actually extremely necessary because what you're about, when you hear this, the way that this started, like Kate had just walked in, we're like, okay, well, let's start the interview. And this is what she was met with, the inexperience and the imposter that is me in front of the panel. So without further ado, here is the imperfect start of our chat with Kate Reid. No.
I feel confident.
I think potentially we've undervalued Josh's contribution to this podcast.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Okay, let's just listen to this for a minute and we'll start.
Yeah.
Okay.
I fall in all you do, the glade in the garden.
Welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. We have we have such a wonderful guest today, and I do like to get into their bio, but I feel like your bio is will be the exciting part of today's chat, so I don't want to go too far into it.
You don't want to spoil what's to come.
Yeah. It's an amazing story. It really is. We're joined today by Kate Reid. Kate, well, welcome, first of all, Kate. You can
Thank
talk.
you so much.
Hi, Kate.
I'm allowed to talk now.
Please.
Friend of Ryan's, which is not your bio.
It forms part of it.
Yeah, I think it's a big part. Definitely put it on the CV.
Yeah, it's already there.
Good.
Don't even need a surname, just friend of Ryan's.
Yeah.
Oh, must be Shelton. Wow.
Must be Kate Reid.
Well, Kate Reid. Now, if you don't know the name Kate Reid, you most definitely, well, if you're in Melbourne for sure.
Maybe you're celiac.
Oh, true.
I don't know.
Yeah, true. Well, Kate Reid, the founder of Lune.
Yeah.
Lune Croissants.
And I reckon we just say to really paint a picture of if you haven't had a croissant from, what's that word?
How do you say it?
Oh, I think croissant is
Croissant.
the way most Australians
Josh
say
and
it.
Josh and I have a weird way of saying it.
Well, you say the
Do
French
you say
way.
croissant?
Croissant.
Well, that's the French way, but I get teased for saying it like that sometimes.
So do Josh and I. So does Josh, especially from Ryan.
From Ryan, yeah. Me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's because, they say it, it's like, because they'll talk normally in the rest of the sentence. It's like, yeah, no, sometimes when I was younger, I used to go and get croissants.
Yeah.
It's not like that whole sentence was in a French accent.
Yeah.
No. It's just the word and it's fine. And I think maybe part of me is just jealous that they have such a cultured way of saying it. And I just say croissant.
Well, we say zont at Lune.
Zont.
Yeah, we had this wonderful delivery driver who had Greek ancestry. Or, well, he was from Greece, not ancestry. He was actually from the country Greece. And he said croissant.
Oh,
And Cameron started calling it, my brother, Cam started calling it croissant.
love it.
And then it just got shortened to zont. And now people say it when they're not even referring to Lune, which is pretty cool.
Oh, it's just become a zont.
Yeah.
Are you in the Urban Dictionary yet?
I should be.
I feel like zont should be in
I'm
there.
going to look into that after this.
I think it will be now.
And I think probably the best way to describe how good your zonts are is that New York Times voted them the best zont in the world.
It's
I
pretty wild.
But how you got to that is also an incredible story. So I guess that's sort of what we're going to get into today.
Can I just add a little tidbit of extra information? Don't worry, I won't be constantly jumping in. But that Oliver Strand, who wrote that New York Times article, weirdly around because that was like a 2016.
Oh, you're
that
good.
article.
That's exactly right.
Well,
yeah.
I looked it up just before. But around that time, I went to New York and weirdly met him through another friend
No
and
way.
had like lunch with him. And he said, I've just been trying croissants around the world and I tried the one from Lune and I think it's the best one, better than all the ones in France. And I was like, I felt this immense sense of pride because I was like, no, but the Lune croissant's the best in the world. And he was like, I really think it is.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild.
So my story about Lune very quickly is that I have only had Lune once, but I've always wanted it, and Josh talks about it nonstop, and I always drive past and see the queues. And about 2.5 years ago, nearly 3 years ago now, Penny and I had our second child, Elsie, and we stayed, after you're in the hospital, they kick you out and put you in a hotel. And so we were in the hotel for the first week of Elsie's life, and it was across the road. It was the Hyatt, so it was across the road from Lune in the city in Melbourne, and Penny said she was so excited. And she said, can you go and get me Lune or get us Lune? And I went, yeah, no worries. And I stepped outside and I saw the queue and I messaged her and said, I could be an hour. And she said, I won't say exactly what she said, but she said, you're getting me Lune after all I've been through. I said, absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. I've just given you a child.
Yeah, whatever I can queue for an hour after what you've done.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite an hour. It was like maybe 50 minutes, but it was, and I'm telling you right now, it was the most worthwhile queuing I've ever done in my entire life. It was.
Yeah.
I agree with that guy that you met.
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Thank you so much.
Must have given you a real insight in the pain of childbirth to really experience like what it must be like, the pain and the suffering to have to queue for 50 minutes.
It was. I was going to say it was cold outside, but it wasn't. It was February. It was quite nice,
day.
actually. Yeah.
So it was lovely weather. Your wife had just given birth to your child, and you had to stand in a queue for 50 minutes to have a delicious croissant. This sounds like a pretty good story.
I'm joking. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Elsie had just been born, and I'm standing outside, delirious with sleep deprivation. But I was so excited to get to Lune, and it was wonderful. It was so worth
that's
the wait.
amazing.
It was beautiful. So that's my Lune experience.
I actually, just to dive in with a very current story, I still manage the Lune Instagram account, and we got tagged in a post yesterday, and I can't say a number of the words, like even her Instagram handle has a word that I can't say in it.
Yep.
But I garnered from her profile that she's from New York and she likes a croissant, and so she'd come to Lune because of the review from the New York Times.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you should be nervous. So she says that the review on the New York Times was absolute rubbish. And she says, don't get me wrong, the croissant was an effing delight. It was light and flaky and buttery and soft and absolutely fresh. But she said, I feel like it should have been a bit more rustic and imperfect. It feels like it didn't have any soul.
That is so when you read that, what do you think about that?
Oh, I don't normally respond to negative comments. But
Did you say something?
I did actually respond to this
Amazing.
one. And
What
I
did
said,
you say?
I'm sorry, but rustic is just a flowery word for lazy and lack of attention to detail. If you'd visited our Fitzroy store and actually observed our chefs making the pastries, you would have witnessed the amount of soul, love, care and attention to detail that goes into our pastries. Every single one is hand-measured, cut and shaped. We really care about our product.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
what did she come back with?
Oh, she hasn't responded.
Well, was that a DM or was that like a...
No, it was a public post.
Oh, how nice of her.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, wow. Good response.
I love that she actually loved it.
But it's kind of like a really interesting topic. I mean, I feel like I want to get into your story, and the story's really the really amazing thing.
Yeah, sorry, I did just...
No, but I feel like this plays into it in a really interesting way. This like perfectionism mindset is really interesting. I feel, and maybe we'll talk about it later, but
It's definitely a theme throughout my life.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think maybe the best place to start would be with your education. I think a lot of people listening, if they don't know your story, are thinking, oh, I'm sure she's a chef or she studied hospitality and then was... What did you do at university? I mean, I know the answer, but just tell everyone. What did you? I don't want you to think that. Anyway, what did you do? What did you study at university?
I studied Aerospace Engineering at RMIT with a very specific goal to getting into Formula One, to design Formula One cars.
Is that does that classify you as a rocket scientist?
Technically, yes.
Wow.
Except I'd never actually worked in the field of space while I was in that career. So...
Jeez.
This is great. I love this. Just when this episode comes out, there'll be a lot of people who are making decisions about their future with university and schooling. And I think it's a lovely little message just in that what you choose to do right now or what you've got into, it doesn't decide your future and it's not final. And because, I mean, imagine if someone came up to you while you're on your first day of your course and you're thinking, I'm
let
all
me
about
tell you
F1
what you're
here.
going to be doing in 20 years' time.
Yeah, you'd go, oh, that's, what's happened here?
It's funny though because Lune would never have happened had the aerospace engineering and working in Formula One not happened. Like they're very intrinsically tied to each other, and it doesn't really matter that I'm not working as an aerospace engineer anymore. The study that I did at RMIT and the career that ensued has definitely informed how I operate professionally and personally, and the level of attention to detail that I put into everything I do, how I break down a problem and problem solve. It's all from that original education.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating.
Because we've jumped a few steps here. So you've mentioned Formula One, and people are like, whoa, hang on, aerospace engineering, croissants, Formula One. What? So should we step back? So after uni, what did you just go like buy a Formula One car, or what was the path?
Yeah, well, like maybe to backtrack a little bit, when I was 13, the Grand Prix moved from Adelaide to Melbourne, And Dad had always flown over to the Adelaide Grand Prix, but he took myself and my brother for the first time on like the Friday for the Formula One free practice. And that was a real life-changing moment for me. When I think about that day, I can imagine and remember every little detail of that day, like what the weather was like. It was a bit cloudy, a little bit drizzly, the sound of the cars coming out for the first time, like you almost felt the vibration in the air. And I knew that day that I wanted my professional life to be involved with Formula One.
Wow.
And it wasn't about the glitz and glamour around it. It was actually about the technical excellence involved with the design of the cars. So from the age of 13, I started to direct all of my studies towards what I could do to get into Formula One.
Yeah, because I wanted to be a grid girl, but that was never going to happen. So,
you should never say never.
You never say never. That's true.
That's what we've learned already from this.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows what's next?
If you leave the podcast and go and do that, I'll be sad.
Same. So
you could just do it as a one-off.
Many others who like watching Formula One will be very disappointed.
I really understand what you're saying there, because Ryan and I went to the Grand Prix together, and it's the first time I've been this year in Melbourne, and it's quite an intoxicating. Like for 41 then, a 41-year-old male who is pretty happy with what he's doing in life. I didn't think I want to go and design cars, but the whole feeling was quite intoxicating, the whole experience.
Yeah, there's something very special about it, and the amount of energy, like the technical excellence that goes into the cars, like the whole thing is such a show. It's and it's also, and this is important to my story, what you see at the actual F1 races is only a fraction of what it means to work in the Formula One industry. It's the very shiny, glamorous part of it. Working in Formula One for the majority of people that do it is not like that.
So a lot of people watched and loved Drive to Survive on Netflix.
Yes.
Did you watch it, and does that give more of an insight into what it's like to do what you do?
Oh, definitely not.
Okay. You didn't like it, or you did?
Oh, I think Drive to Survive is an incredible series, and I do think it gives some more insight into the drama and the stories of what goes on behind the scenes, but it still only represents a fraction of the people that work in Formula One, and it really doesn't celebrate the designers, engineers, wind tunnel technicians, model makers, the people that work in HR and administration. Like, you know, the F1 team that I worked in, Williams, was a team of 500 when I worked for them, and maybe like 40 of them travel to the race. But yeah, so for 460 of us back at the factory, see that maths there? That's Aerospace Engineer.
Very good.
Yeah.
Wow. And you do have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out.
You do,
I actually had to check my numbers there. I'm like, imagine if I got that wrong.
I would not notice. I would just believe you. Okay, it doesn't
Just the
sound right to me,
nodding.
but it would have to be right.
Yeah, she's the aerospace engineer. Yeah. What do I know? Yeah.
But then even for those people that travel, the travelling only represents, 4 days out of every 2 weeks. And for the rest of us back at the factory, you're working shockingly long hours. Like, it's written on your contract maybe 8 to 5. But if you leave work at 5 or 5:30, everyone looks up and says, "Oh, we're doing a half day today, are we?" And
Right.
Sir Frank Williams, he would patrol the hallways, 9 or 10 o'clock at night to see who was working late,
Right.
or who was putting in the effort. And I found out not long after I started at Williams that something like 3,000 CVs land on the desk of the HR department every week.
Oh, wow.
So
What does that feel like, knowing that 3,000 people are coming for your job or want your job?
they definitely use that as motivation to apply pressure, like, you're lucky that you're working here, you should be putting in the effort. Like, my salary as a qualified aerospace engineer working as an aerodynamicist at Williams was £13,000 a year.
Oh,
So, yeah.
how long ago was that?
2006, 2007. So, like, not that long ago.
That seems criminal. I mean, I don't know what the minimum wage is in the UK, but it must be above that.
Because I watched Drive to Survive, and I was thinking, because they'd always have those shots of the head office of the different. I remember thinking that would be amazing. You'd be paid so much to hang out in that area and do what you do and be involved in a brand like that.
There are some people who are paid an awful lot of money,
Yeah.
but you have to really earn your stripes and prove yourself invaluable in the team. The likes of Adrian Newey or Sam Michael in the era that I worked in Formula One, But like talking about the amount of money in it, my first day, I was walked into the pretty new aerodynamics facility, which was separate to the rest of the design and the head office. And you had to have extra security clearance to get in there. Such was the level of confidentiality of the work that we were doing. They had a 60% scale wind tunnel, which most of the teams had. But then they also had a full-scale wind tunnel, which at the time I think only 2 or 3 of the teams had.
When you say 60%, do you mean the car's the 60% version of the car as well?
Yeah, exactly.
So what's a wind tunnel? I don't...
So a wind tunnel is a piece of equipment that you put a model in and you can control the speed of the wind travelling over that model to measure like the forces.
Oh, right. So you don't have to actually drive the car anywhere to test it. You put it in a tunnel.
Yeah, and it has very sensitive pads that measure the different forces. So if you're testing an aeroplane, you're testing lift and drag, and if you're testing a car, you're testing downforce and drag.
Does it look like? No, it wouldn't actually.
Go on. I want to know what you're going to say.
I know it already. It doesn't. The first thing I pitched to my head was a car wash.
Do you know?
Oh yeah. Oh, like a tunnel that it goes through.
You know, the car wash where you're driving.
It's essentially a tunnel. And like one side of it is glass, and then the control room, it's not dissimilar to where we're sitting at the moment with like huge monitors.
Okay.
And then microphones where if the tunnel technicians are changing a part on the car, the engineers can communicate with the tunnel technicians without leaving the control room.
Huh.
But the full-scale wind tunnel actually had a rolling road, and you could wheel the actual Formula One car in and tether it. Actually, one night...
Like a treadmill for the car.
Literally. So one night we're testing, I was on a midnight shift, and we got word that at Honda down the road, the tunnel technicians hadn't tethered the car properly. Like their multi-million-dollar Formula One car in their multi-million-dollar wind tunnel. And they turned it on and the tethers let go and the car disappeared back into the wind tunnel and ruined the car and the wind tunnel. And the technicians responded by just diving under the desk.
How much is a wind tunnel? How much would a wind tunnel cost?
Oh, I'd be taking a great stab in the dark, but it would be millions and millions.
Okay. So the culture, I'm guessing it's quite a hard-working type culture. You're doing long hours?
Yeah, I think it was not unusual to do somewhere between 12, 15, 16 hours a day. My senior aerodynamicist in my team, I worked on the front end of the car, so typically like front wing, end plates, brake ducts for front wheels and air inlet, so kind of cut off at the end of the nose cone. My senior aerodynamicist would often be at work still at midnight, and I sometimes wondered if he actually went home.
How many females are working in this environment?
Well, I was the only female in the entire aerodynamics facility. That was about 120 people. They didn't even have a female toilet. So myself and Sir Frank shared the disabled toilet. Yeah.
Wow. So you and Sir Frank shared the toilet?
Yeah, not at the same time,
no.
though. Yeah. Unless we were both desperate.
120 people is only one woman.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And how many across the whole business, do you think?
I think there was no, at my time there was no other female working technically, but they were in like marketing, PR and HR.
Right. Oh my gosh.
So on my first week at Williams, I think it was like the Wednesday or Thursday night, I had stayed late. I was maybe 9:30 at night, and there weren't that many of us left in the office. And my desk faced out onto this central corridor with like a little partition that I could see over. Anyway, I noticed the door open and Sir Frank rolled in his wheelchair and he wheeled past me, and then I saw his head stop and he rolled back and he looked over and he went, "Oh my God, it's a girl." And
wow.
So we got chatting and I think it annoyed the guys a bit because I was the only girl, it was easy to remember my name. And so then when he would visit the aerodynamics office, he would always greet me by name, but maybe didn't remember everybody else's. And I wasn't, apart from the fact that I was female, I wasn't particularly special in comparison to, like, everyone had earned their place to be there, had studied really hard and was top of their class. But Frank would always, Sir Frank, sorry, he would always come and ask me how my family were back in Melbourne and quite personal. So I think
I have to say I'm very bad with famous people. I don't know him at all. What's his story? Is he
so he was he was a Formula One driver.
Right.
And he'd gone out for a test at Paul Ricard in the south of France, a testing circuit, but was coming back to the UK to run a marathon and was running late to get back to the airport. And he was driving with, I believe I'm telling the details of this story correctly, but was driving back to the airport through mountainous roads and had a shocking accident and was rendered a quadriplegic. So,
Right.
Wow, I didn't know that.
yeah.
Wow.
And he actually passed away last year. And
That's right, yeah.
I found it very emotional the day that I found that out because I felt very blessed, even though my experience in Formula One obviously came to an end and there were negative aspects about it for me. I felt very blessed to have had my experience at one of the few remaining privately owned teams. And Sir Frank had founded the team and had seen it through for several decades and had an awful lot of success, like had won many championships in the 80s and 90s.
Because Williams went through a real phase of being like
the best.
The Ferrari of the time, or the
Mercedes
or whatever.
Yeah.
And like from the few docos I've seen of Formula One, he's sort of lauded as this like icon of the sport, isn't he?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And for me to have had my experience in Formula One working with such a legend who I actually had the privilege of having one-on-one time with. Like, I think my most special memories of working at Williams were the late night shifts in the wind tunnel where Sir Frank would come in and we would actually talk about the design of the car together. And
Wow.
I feel very privileged that I had that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm interested in how you coped emotionally and mentally through what must have been, I mean, culturally it sounds like it was a pretty tough environment.
Yes.
How were you through that time? Was it a tough I mean, it sounds like professionally you would have been, what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, I mean, I imagine, I don't know what you're trying to say, but
How's this for an interview?
But I feel like if you're over there, you've come from Australia and you've gone over there to work in this what appears to be a glamorous job, and like so few people get accepted. I can only imagine that all your friends and family back here are just thinking, "Wow, you're living the dream life. How lucky are
That
you?"
is such a better way of asking the question.
Well, I haven't even asked a question yet. I've just sort of
No, I
stated
know where
something.
you're going, and I really like it. I really like it.
What was your experience? Like Hugh said, like was your experience? Did it match what everyone else would have assumed you would have been experiencing?
Oh, and also what I had built up over a period of a decade of my life, envisioning what that final job would be. And I always knew that it would be majority office-based, but at the time when I worked at Williams, they were very much a mid-pack team, so they weren't front runners anymore. And as such, when you're not the winning team, there's an awful lot of pressure on everyone working in the team to make the car perform better.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I felt like working in Formula One would represent, the best brains in their industry with, an enviable budget to work with, an endless resource to think very much outside the box. Like, in the 90s, Williams innovated traction control and then regenerative braking came along and Formula One had informed changes in the commercial automotive industry that we now experience as standard on the cars that we drive.
Mm-hmm.
And I was excited about being in an industry that technology like that was, developed and innovated. But when I got to Williams, we were playing catch up. And when you're playing catch up, you're not the ones innovating and leading the way. You're trying to figure out what the other teams are doing. And it feels very much like throwing muck at a wall and whatever sticks goes on the car. And it felt like, you'd come up with an idea and your senior aerodynamicist would say, okay, I want you to model 15 different versions of that. And 15 different versions was maybe like 2-degree increment changes in a front wing end plate element.
And then create the model so you could then test it in the wind tunnel.
Yeah, but create it on a computer. So you're just sitting there modelling parts, and then those modelled 3D parts go up to the model makers and they physically make the part. And then you're rostered on 1 out of every 4 weeks in the wind tunnel, and then you go in and you test the part that you had to model, and numbers come through. And if the numbers aren't as good as the current baseline, it would literally just get thrown in the bin. Like there was
Wow.
no understanding as to, okay, let's analyze why that didn't work, because the merit in the idea is still there, but maybe we need to adjust something. It was just scrapped. And it felt like there was almost no point in having an idea because, and this is something that I've learnt through Formula One, and because it didn't happen, if you have an idea and the result isn't what you expected, it's not a failure, it's a learning. As long as you take the learning and you go, okay, well, how am I going to progress from here? And in Formula One, my experience was if you didn't get the result you expected, it was just scrapped. But I also imagined that it would be an environment where there was a lot of interaction and brainstorming. Like how lucky that you've got this big budget. I mean, Formula One's not saving the world. Let's all be honest. I mean, it's probably doing the opposite at the moment.
Right.
But at least it's fun to watch.
Yes.
But it felt like it wasn't fun. Like
Your experience.
Yeah, you weren't really talking in the
lonely
office.
or
Yeah, talking in the office was frowned upon. So it was silent. Like there was like 35 of us and often you would hear a pin drop. So it wasn't fun. It wasn't social. I didn't feel like I could go to someone and talk to an idea that I had and it was long hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, the British winter, I mean, I'm assuming all three of us have been in London over the winter.
Just summer, but I heard stories.
Yeah.
Oh,
it gets cold.
Yep.
and
Yeah,
also
dark.
it's like it gets light at 8:30 in the morning and it's dark at 3:30 in the afternoon. So you'd show up at work in the dark and you'd go home in the dark and you would just never see daylight.
Yeah.
So and I'm pretty sure that a daylight and vitamin D is good for our mental health.
Yes.
So I worked at Williams for a year and then another smaller team sort of headhunted me. I think they were looking to add more entry-level aerodynamicists to their team. And they approached me if I'd be interested to move to them.
So you'd been at Williams for a year at this stage,
Yep.
yeah. Okay.
And a friend of mine who was working as a senior aerodynamicist at Williams, I confided in him because he'd worked for this team and he recommended that I make the move because it was a smaller team. I might get more opportunity to do broader work. And moving to that team was probably the nail in the coffin of my Formula One experience. The attitude and the workplace was even worse than Williams. At least at Williams, I felt like I was at a team that had a backing of like success and there was a lot of pride to work there.
And a history and
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I moved to this particular new team, which is now I think they're now Aston Martin, but they've gone through a myriad of rebrands over the years. It was called Force India when I worked for them.
Force India, yeah.
Yeah. So the person who recommended that I move was my boyfriend. He became my boyfriend when I left the team. And he said, I'm veering into like relationship, but I'd also fancied him while I worked at Williams. And he said to me when I left, look, I've always liked you as well, but I felt like it was better that we didn't work together and enter into a relationship. But then a couple of months after I started the new team, he said, I've actually accepted a job at that team as well and I'm going to be your boss.
Oof.
So already the situation wasn't great for me at the new team. And then 6 months later he started and I think I was probably undiagnosed but suffering from quite bad depression at the time. And it went from bad to worse after that.
What did depression sort of feel like for you? I know that different people report it feeling differently. And is there, if you don't mind me asking, is there a way that you would kind of summarise your experience of it?
Oh, I would sit at my computer with headphones in and just listen to like angry killers songs. And
Right.
I sat at my computer one day and wrote a Jerry Maguire-esque
A memo.
about how much I hated Formula One and the fact that like we were carbon neutral just because Bernie Ecclestone had bought a chunk of the Amazon rainforest to offset the shocking damage to the environment that Formula One does, and how it was not an industry that really encouraged and supported females enter. Like I was one of two females at the team then, and the other female had mental health issues as well. Like it was prominent. I would probably say a lot of people who work in Formula One are suffering from mental health issues because it's not somewhere that you go, oh, I don't know how to describe it. I'm sorry, I'm not being very...
No, it just sounds like an environment where you have to be incredibly robust to sort of survive. And I mean, and the chips are definitely stacked against you if you're a female. I mean, that experience that's an awful thing to happen. Did you stay with that guy or was that...
Oh, yes. So he started, his first day of work was my birthday and nobody in the office knew it was my birthday, but everyone was really excited for him to come back to the team because he'd worked there previously. So they kind of held a bit of a party to celebrate him coming back. And
on your birthday.
I don't know how this happened, but I found myself about 2 kilometres away from the factory and a woman working in a factory nearby had found me and taken me in, and all I recall is sitting in this little like kitchenette staff room in her factory and she'd given me a hot cup of tea and she was trying to calm me down. But
So you don't remember how you got 2 kilometres away from the factory?
no.
Wow.
Do you remember what state you're in when you're having that?
Oh, I was disoriented and very upset. She ended up calling my boyfriend and he came down and got me. We then went through a period where we worked together and it didn't go particularly well. I think because everybody knew that we were in a relationship, he was harder on me than other people.
Mm-hmm.
But we still maintained the relationship. And by this point, maybe being with him was one of the only reasons that I felt I should be in the UK at all. And I started to really miss home. Like, I'm very close to my family. I have a really strong relationship with my mum, my dad and my brother. Had really close friends back here. And I started to miss Melbourne.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so just moved by you sharing that. I'm just wondering about were there other mental health issues that came along with that? Often it can be an anxiety that will lead to depression, or what was your experience? And also,
it got worse from there.
Right. Okay.
So I ended up, one female friend that I had, she was a friend of a guy I'd worked with at Williams, and they'd kind of put us together because they're like, you're the two girls, you can be friends.
Mm-hmm.
She worked for a marketing company specialising in Formula One, and she said, look, Kate, there's a job going here for one of the accounts. Do you want to change and try something different from engineering? It's a more even spread of male, female in the office. You get the opportunity to do some travel. It might be good for you. So I took a job at this place then, and this is kind of entering into my 3rd year over in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And had I been mentally healthy, this could potentially have been my dream job. Like, I ended up flying out, to Monaco 2 times for the race, and I went to Barcelona. I had to go and travel around Europe to do a couple of installations with Formula One cars. But by this stage, my mental health was so battered, and I was probably in an unhealthy relationship, even though maybe we didn't acknowledge it at the time, that I just got sicker and sicker. And my boyfriend said, look, I think you need to make some new friends in the town that we're in that aren't related to Formula One. He said, I'll sign you up to the gym. He knew I couldn't afford it based on my salary. He wouldn't tell me what he was on, but I know it was at maybe 4 or 5 times what I was on.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I'll pay for you to join the gym, but I'm only paying if you actually use the membership and go several times a week.
Oh, God.
And so somebody whose mental health...
Sorry, before I make a comment to that, are you still with this guy?
Oh, God, no.
Oh, okay, good.
No.
Sounds close.
So somebody who, like, touching back on that element of, like, perfectionism, I think being an aerospace engineer requires a level of, like, accuracy, attention to detail and perfectionism, and working in Formula One absolutely does too. And if you can channel that in a really positive way, great things can come from it. But I think someone like me who is driven by perfectionism, it's a thin line between positive and negative. And when I went to the gym, the first thing that they did was the classic orientation, and they do some measurements and they get you to, like, they measure your heart rate and how flexible you are and things. And then they gave you a really generic program, but it wasn't with a personal trainer. It was like, you just go and do this over the next, and every week we'll check your measurements. and give a girl who's suffering mental health issues very easy number targets to understand, and it becomes obsessive. So over the course of the next few months, I became obsessed with the gym, and they would hand out these really basic nominal cards about healthy eating that spoke about like understanding calories and carbohydrates, sugars, fats and everything. And I was like a moth to a flame with the information. Like suddenly I had this, energy output with exercise and energy input with food, and how both of them can result in you being fitter and more flexible and, have a lower heart rate. And every week when they do the measurements, they were like, yeah, you're doing great. Look how much more flexible you are. And like, oh, look this measurement, look at your waist.
And I'm imagining that a lot of that was around food as well.
I became obsessed, and the relationship really plummeted at this point because also we were in our 20s and neither of us had ever faced anything like this before. I refused to go out to restaurants because I didn't trust what the chefs were putting in the food. I stopped going to friends' houses for dinner. I would have to prepare and cook everything that we ate. When my boyfriend, he got really worried about me. I know I've painted a dark picture, but he did care about me and he became incredibly worried, and he would pack my lunch for me. And he started insisting that we meet for lunch so he could witness me eating it, but he would pack other snacks and I'd get to work and I'd just throw the snacks in the bin and then I would tell him that I'd eaten them. Mm-hmm. But when you drop below a certain weight with anorexia, you lose the ability of rational thought and you can't see that you're heading down a very dark path. It just becomes this I would weigh myself at exactly the same time every morning. I couldn't have had a drop of water to drink because I wanted to know exactly what I weighed. And I had these crazy spreadsheets. It was like my body had become the Formula One car and I was trying to improve on the baseline.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
What a frightening but also very good analogy.
Yeah.
And this is also coming from someone with your brain, who I know so much about eating disorders, and often, not always, but often there's people with a very high intellect.
Yeah, I think anorexia in particular tackles people that I would say suffer from perfectionism. So yeah, it was a pretty dark time, and in May 2018, my boyfriend called my mum and dad, and he said, I just don't know how to manage her anymore. I'm really worried. Dad booked a flight, was in the UK within a matter of days, packed up my life and brought me back to Australia. And that was it. No more Formula One.
And did you stay with your boyfriend? Was that
we
the end?
stayed together for, I think, about 18 months, long distance. And I was devastated that he didn't, quote unquote, love me enough to move to Australia to continue my recovery with me. And I the theme of the conversations were, when are you going to come to Australia? Because I had such a negative memory of the UK. I at some point I imagined myself never going back there. Mm-hmm. And it was probably about 18 months in, and I hadn't started to get better yet, but I was on this recovery process. And because he wasn't a daily part of my life, I think I'd been consumed a bit by the eating disorder, and my life was about routine of doctors, psychiatrists, dietitians, my 6 meal plan a day. And he called me up one day and he's like, I've organised a job in Australia. I've organised flying lessons. I can move now. And I'm like, don't bother. I don't love you anymore. And it was like, you basically, I don't even think you can have feeling for other people when you're in the midst of an eating disorder, because you are so wrapped up in the eating disorder and yourself. And that wasn't me speaking, but obviously I totally broke his heart, because little did I know he was devastated back in the UK, worried about me and trying to figure out how to move. Keeping in mind he'd worked his whole life to work in Formula One as well, and had gotten there and was doing really well in it. But suddenly something that he cared about was on the other side of the world. And he had to figure out, I like this saying, a developer said it to us last year, he had to figure out how to unscramble the omelette and move this very well-packaged life of his that he was enjoying to Australia to be with the one thing that wasn't in his life. And he did that, and I wasn't having a bar of it at that stage.
It's certainly my experience of living with someone with an eating disorder, with my little sister, who, I did an interview this morning and someone asked me a bit out of the blue. I wasn't quite expecting it to be about my sister, but they asked about what it was like living with someone with an eating disorder. And at the time, I found myself, one of the regrets, regret's a bit of a strong word, but I wish I was more understanding of the headspace that she was in. I would often think, what are you doing to us? Like, just eat food and then we're all going to, but I look back.
It's so hard to be in that headspace if you're not unwell. Like, and bless my dad, like, I know he just wanted to get me home and he's like, let's cook roasts every night and you'll be fine. But it's not the food. It's some deep-seated thing that you need to work through.
I wish someone had said to me back then, and not anyone close to me, I wish a doctor or someone had said to me, you saying just eat food or thinking just eat food is like saying to someone with a broken leg, just get up and run. Just go for a run. You can't.
Yeah.
You simply can't do that. But it's very hard, especially as an adolescent, to understand that, I think. And in the 90s when we weren't, for my sister, we weren't talking about mental illness back then at schools. No, I didn't know what it was. So to go from that step, but I just want to validate what you just said, that from my experience, what I saw with my sister, it is very hard to think about other people when you're in the grips of it.
Oh, and it's like, I think one of the things that I've acknowledged since coming out of it that I would really like to do more work on is I still think of all the mental health issues, eating disorders are still a bit of a taboo subject. And because they are, we're not talking about how support can be improved for the families of the people that are suffering. Like, I saw what it put mum and dad through. Like, but it's hard to even know what the right thing is to say. Like, if you're finally putting on weight and someone says to you, you look great, you've put some weight on. Like, that's the worst thing to say to someone with an eating disorder because they're so self-conscious about it. Like, I would find if like a more positive thing to say would be like, oh, you've got more sparkle back in your eyes, or like your skin looks better. But to actually reference someone's weight when they're going through recovery is one of the worst things you can do.
Yeah, it'd be remiss of me not to mention an incredible group now called EDFA, Eating Disorders Families Australia, and they exist for the siblings and for the parents or carers, and it's all about education and counselling for them. It's wonderful. You would love it. So yeah, but anyway, I just could not mention it now because they're just incredible. But that's a bit of a sidestep. I agree with you. It's just listening to you talk about that, I realise not many people. You hear people talk about depression and anxiety, which is so good, but I haven't heard too many public conversations around eating disorders.
So in May 2018, I decided that I wanted to write essentially like a short memoir of, like, everyone was celebrating Lune, like, wow, Formula One to croissants, like this glamorous story.
Which I really want to talk about in a second, but yes, keep going, sorry.
But I was like, I remember saying to a few journalists, and then I suffered from this eating disorder, and they were like, we don't want to write about that because it's not shiny and it's messy and taboo. And I was getting really sick of people not properly representing my story because I think the eating disorder is one of the most crucial parts of it, which I should get to. But I wanted to write a memoir and I wanted it to be published publicly. But I didn't want it to go in, a newspaper. I wanted it to go in a food magazine because food magazines were the ones that were writing about Lune. And I reached out to the editor of Gourmet Traveller at the time, and she'd just come from, I think, doing war correspondence. So she'd brought this real lease of life into Gourmet Traveller, and she was like, I would love you to do that. And she said, I'm happy to help you write it, or if you want to write it, you can. And she kind of just gave me free rein, and I wrote a long piece about suffering from the eating disorder, and she published it.
Wow.
Yeah. And from that, the Royal Melbourne Hospital have an eating disorders unit, and they reached out to me, and prior to COVID, they were bringing their day patient programs to Lune once every 6 weeks to have like a challenge yourself day. And I would come and sit with the group of maybe 8 or 10 people who were suffering from an eating disorder and share my experience with them and have a croissant with them. And that was one of the really positive things to come from writing the article.
So
Yeah.
can I ask about every time I speak about my sisters, my sister's in a great place now and she's doing so many incredible things. So often people come up to me and will say, my child is struggling right now, or my sister's struggling right now. How did she get to this place where she's an incredible story of hope and resilience, my sister. Well, our sister is in Josh and my sister. How did you get to this place where you are now a picture of hope and resilience?
I think you have to find something, like speaking again about this idea of like perfectionism. Like I know I have OCD tendencies and I can be obsessive about things, for example, Formula One, croissants. You need to find something that will overtake the eating disorder in your brain. And
as in something that you obsess about more?
Or something that you're passionate about that kind of forces the eating disorder out, and then life becomes too important. This is my experience. I'm not sure if it's your sister's.
Yeah.
But for me, when I first started suffering from anorexia back in the UK, I was obsessed with baking. And I'd come home I'd plan what I would bake during the day at work, and then I'd go home via like a supermarket or a specialty ingredient store, and I'd procure all the ingredients, come home. And for me, baking is like some combination of science and magic. Like you can't eat raw flour or raw sugar. I mean, that's terrible. But you bring these ingredients together and the sum of their parts is so much greater than their raw ingredients. But also there's scientific interaction of the ingredients together and what happens and what it creates. So I would live vicariously through this process of baking at home, and then I would take it into the office the next day, and then I would live vicariously through seeing how happy what I'd done made people. And like I could kind of imagine myself enjoying it without having to actually eat it. So for me, baking became a bit of therapy and also kind of a way to indulge in food without indulging in food. And that continued when I got back to Australia. And I think the day that I landed back in Australia, the first thing Mum and Dad did was take me to their family GP, who promptly told Mum and Dad that if we didn't start acting on recovery, I probably had 6 weeks left to live, which is,
wow.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
Were you there when they said that?
No, Mum and Dad told me this after.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. That's not something that you need to hear. Or maybe it is. I don't know.
But how did you feel when your mum and dad said that? Because that must, for them to hear that, how confronting.
Yeah. Pretty devastated that I'd gotten myself to a place where my mum and dad had to hear that about their daughter.
And were they, and don't feel like you need to answer any of these questions, but were they, because definitely like older generations don't have the information and don't have the maybe understanding of what it, I mean, even people now don't really have the understanding of what it's like to be in the midst of a crisis like that you can't stop, you can't get out of. But when they get told that, are they frustrated or are they
No.
worried, or like what's your parents?
I am 100% confident they were incredibly worried.
Yeah.
But they really just like built this little cocoon of support around me.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
And how did they do that? So what did they?
Well, like I lived with them for a couple, like, you know, fully grown adult who'd had her own whole independent life in the UK. I lived with them for a couple of years. I tried to move out once, and that was an unmitigated disaster because I slipped straight back to not eating again, and I was just very unhappy. But they took me to doctor's appointments. They prepared meals that they knew that I felt comfortable and safe eating. They sheltered me from people that didn't fully understand it. Yeah, they're
Incredible.
amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm very lucky.
Okay, well that's the end of part one, and this will continue next episode. There's another whole section of the story about her recovery and how that then sort of led to the creation of like her getting into pastries and eventually what she now has, which is a croissant empire called Lune.
And also kind of how her passion or her purpose really drove her recovery, which is something I haven't heard people talk much about before, which I can't wait for people to listen to. But it's also just fascinating to hear someone problem solve their way through starting from scratch to now, as you said, an empire.
So EDFA, Hugh, you mentioned in the chat with Kate. So how you have a relationship with them? You kind of work with them?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to be their ambassador. Eating Disorders Families Australia, a group that I wish existed so much when our family was going through the grips of an eating disorder. They're a wonderful, wonderful group who, when they reached out to me, I often would chat to different organisations around mental health or mental illness and trying to work out who I want to support. And it's it was a no-brainer for EDFA because they exist to help the family members of people struggling with an eating disorder, and that is very much the experience Josh and I had for a long time. So what they do is they provide counselling, so group counselling for the siblings of anyone listening to that right now who loves someone with an eating disorder, the second they heard Kate mention anorexia or disordered eating, I know they would have had a very physical reaction to it in their gut and in their heart the second they heard it, because it just turns your life upside down to the point where the very mention of it's so jarring, and not jarring is the right word, but it really
triggering is probably the right word.
It's almost triggering in a way. You go to your experience of it. So
Josh, you were listening to it for the first time. What was your immediate reaction when you heard her talk about it?
Yeah, it takes me back. It triggers. I think triggering is the best word for me because it takes me back to the physical feeling of what it was like, how long was it now? 20 years ago when we were going through it as a family. It's maybe that means I've got some stuff I've still got to work out about it. But it's really, it takes you back, and it's an awful feeling to be able to access that memory, physical memory so quickly is unpleasant. But it also shows you what an effect it has on the family. I think this group sound incredible here because I know that we did our best. Mum and Dad did their best at the time. We did do family counselling a few times, and there was certainly an effort and an acknowledgement within the family to do our best, but we're kind of flying blind a bit, and there was no real guidance or people out there to tell you what to do or group or shared experience or place to go.
Yeah.
So it makes me so happy. No, happy is not the right word. Filled with hope for other families that there's a bit more structure out there and there's a group of people who can help the families, because it really does. It's a cannonball through the whole family. It's not just the person who's suffering from it.
And I wish so much they existed for us, because one of the things they do is, for example, they have groups so the siblings will get together, all the siblings, they have these group chats with a psychologist in the group or a counsellor in the group who will guide the conversations in a safe way, and people share their experience, even just to know there are other people out there going through the exact same thing, because the toll on the siblings can be quite significant. So just like you said, the sharing the experience is really powerful. Then there's the same groups for parents to sit together and talk, because can't even begin to imagine what that's like as a parent. And they all sit together and they talk about it again with a professional there to help guide the conversation. It's endless resources and education about what's happening. And, one of the most powerful things I heard in one of the conversations had with parents was that you can't fix them. Yet that's what every parent will nearly kill themselves trying to fix their child going through this thing. So EDFA, if you...
So how does it work? Do you just contact
become a member?
them?
Yeah. So one of the things that happened through COVID was that rates of eating disorders doubled. I think when people lost control of
unbelievable
huge part of their life, one of the ways people feel like they can get control of their life is through controlling what they eat, I guess. And so that was one of the devastating impacts of COVID. But there is this great place where you become a member, and it's this community. It's a beautiful community and they are fantastic people at EDFA. They really are. I love working with them so much. So just look up Eating Disorders Families Australia. If you are struggling with what someone is going through. And I do, just before we round this chat out, I do want to say, just Georgia is our sister, Georgia. We talk about it a bit, and she's so generous in allowing her to share her story. And again, we'll send this to her to listen to before we put it out into the world. But Georgia is an incredible picture of hope and resilience for anyone who's in a dark place right now. That eating disorder, our sister, she's good now. She struggled for a long time. She's good now. She's an incredible story of hope and resilience. I mean, she just walked 100 miles from the bottom end of LA state to the top state or county.
California or LA?
Don't know, but it was 100 miles.
100 miles.
She walked for 100 miles, to raise money for her
It's incredible.
charity, Arts Bridging the Gap. So she's incredible.
That's from Melbourne to Bendigo or Sydney to Newcastle. It's unbelievable.
Big stroll.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But she's in a great place, mentally she's in a great place. And so anyone out there who loves someone with an eating disorder or is close to someone or mental illness in general, she's an incredible picture of hope and inspiration.
Well, I mean, it's so nice to hear. But I mean, so is Kate Reid.
Totally.
As we're going to hear in part 2, to hear how Kate recovered and then turned it around in the only way she could. She just sort of like, when you'll hear it, I won't try and paraphrase it, but it's sort of her path to Lune and the croissant and the thing that kind of made her successful and gave her purpose in life. So that's the next part, and so we'll be back for that next week, next episode.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
It's Ryan. So that episode was obviously just the first of 2 parts with Kate Reid, obviously. But I was just thinking, like, wouldn't it be interesting to do a part 3 somehow? Like come up with an idea and make a trilogy of it. I reckon. I mean, how about this for a concept, right? Will you be happier if you have a bottomless account at Lune and eat croissants every day for free whenever you want? Oh, wouldn't that be just so interesting to see what happens with the happiness levels? Like, just like scientifically, you know, how we obviously talk about evidence-based stuff. Like, I'd be interested to gather some evidence on this, and I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to be the guinea pig. Like, all we'd have to do is somehow measure my happiness level now, and then in like, I don't know, to pick a random number out of the air, like 20 years from now, we'd measure my happiness levels again, having eaten free croissants whenever I want for 20 years, and then see the improvement in my happiness. God, I think it'd be so interesting. Like, scientifically, I reckon it'd be fascinating. Yeah, have a think about it. Like I said, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to be the croissant eater. Just because someone's going to do it, and I'm putting my hand up. So yeah, let me know. It's Ryan Shelton, by the way, from the podcast, The Imperfects, that we do together.
To call back, press 2 to replay message. Press 1 to reply. Press 2 to...
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, filmed by Andy Poole and edited by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support.
I hear the echo down the hall, like you were never there at all.